highlights of the last quarter, which include the schemes progressing through the SCF, also submission of a proposal for the One Public Estate Phase 9 that was submitted to government late last year, and we're awaiting response on that, which is due around February time this year, as I understand it, and that's a cross-regional partnership proposal to that fund. And then also an update on the commercial land proposal, which was developed with this board and with DSG in late 2021 and submitted as part of the WMCA's proposals around the comprehensive spending review. We're just to update on that, we're in continuing negotiations with department officials following the spending review announcements at the end of last year, and we are continuing to have those discussions. I indeed had a follow-up discussion last week to keep that momentum going. So hopefully we'll have some further progress to note to the board in due course.
Okay. Any comments or questions? Sorry, Rob.
Sorry, I was just going to say on section 5 of this report, Councillor Bird, we've just got an update on the deliverables for the forthcoming financial year, so 2022-23. These are the draft deliverables that have been set out to support the corporate aims and objectives which were agreed by WMCA board in November 2021. These draft deliverables will be going to WMCA board for approval in March. So section 5 sets those out for the view of this board before they go to the WMCA board in March. So just to update on that as well. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Any questions or comments from anyone, please? No?
Yes, yes.
Andy?
Yeah. Interesting paper. I just wonder how it ties in with the net zero strategy for WMC in 2020-41. And I wonder whether there should be a narrative on that, because clearly land, advanced manufacturing, new technologies, new build are all going to be part of the whole thing, because this can't be divorced from the greater strategic aim of being net zero by 2041. So maybe there ought to be more of a narrative in the paper on that.
Chair, if I just respond to that, I don't know if Gareth wants to add anything as well, but I'll just say, just in terms of that proposal or that comment from Councillor Makovitz, that's certainly part of the overall aims and objectives of the CA, and that's brought out more in the corporate aims and objectives document that was published late last year. But we will certainly be bringing out that narrative and showing how we are supporting that as a portfolio in the future. So taking that on board in the next report, we can certainly set out more of that overall narrative and how this board is working with other parts of the CA and with other parts of the local authorities to make sure that happens.
Okay. Any other comments? Can't see any hands up. Okay. Well, that seems to be accepted then, Rob. Well done. Thanks very much. Moving on then to the SCF, or Single Commissioning Framework, Outputs and Performance Monitoring. Rachel, I think you've got this report.
Yes, it's me. I've just got a few slides to run through as well. Just get those up now. Right, have you got my screen up?
Yep.
Excellent. So as the report's outlined, this paper is basically about enhancing some of our outputs and performance monitoring through the single commissioning framework, and these slides are just going to give a bit more background on that. In terms of why we're doing this, it's to make sure that we're capturing the right information at the right points in the process. There's a bit of an operational aspect here, so it's freeing up time for our land team by reducing work and having to ask the same question again and again. But it's also going to support better monitoring of developer performance, as we'll be capturing more detail about schemes and asking for earlier commitment to some of our key outputs. It's also going to support us to have really systematic and robust data sets that will demonstrate our delivery narrative, give more context to our impact, And we'll be able to use those to inform our strategic direction and understand any gaps and possibilities at a regional and local scale. So, for example, should we be delivering more shared ownership in Coventry? Is there more demand for commercial funds in Walsall? How do we support non-cons more? That sort of information. And it will illustrate housing and land development funding's impact on WMCA's wider key objectives. So what is our investment doing for jobs, homes, meeting WM 2041, innovation or leveraging wider investment. And it will help us to build confidence and delivery assurance with government. We'll be able to provide local authorities with more context and detail on the added value that the CA brings in a local area. I'm just going to move that slide through. So for the past few months, with housing and regeneration officers working closely with our wider WMCA colleagues have been compiling key data requirements for all SCF schemes, for example, jobs, skills, zero carbon, AMC, affordable housing, etc. In terms of what we're trying to measure, it's key strategic outcomes for the organisation that contribute to inclusive growth and social value. The focus is on the definitive and what is actually measurable in terms of time, money or numbers, so what developers are interested in anyway. There's some minor exceptions where we might look at additional information which will be processed by other parts of the organisation, but the purpose here has really been to focus on things that would be brought, that would be measured as part of a planning, project, programming or corporate social responsibility process anyway. So we're not asking for anything new in terms of the data. The new bit is really that we're the ones that are asking for it. So why these metrics? We've considered two overarching strategic documents here, the industrial strategy and the corporate strategy, because they've already drawn the links and acted as a guide for organisational operations. I appreciate the industrial strategy isn't recognised by government in quite the same way anymore, but it has done a very good job of looking at how innovation and delivery are tied together. There's a further sort of three essential documents sit under here, which is housing and regeneration deliverables, which are generally derived from both of the above but more detailed. The strategic economic plan, which provides existing performance monitoring criteria, and also government's funding requirements on the housing deal and other funds that we have. And then finally, there's a series of other key documents across the organisation where our work is essential to delivery, including our own, such as the AMC route map and the Zero Carbon Homes route map. So the key parts of the process and why we think it's worth doing it this way is that what we're suggesting is a system where the developer knows from the very start what we're trying to measure. From triage onwards, they'll have all of those measures to hand. We won't expect them to have all the answers necessarily, but it means that the elements that would be difficult to retrofit post-design or would have cost implications if they're brought in further down the line, so things like MMC and affordable products, considered from the very outset of the SCF process. We've got consistent requirements across every stage of the process, which ensures it's transparent and that WMCA officers will be able to prioritise time with those developers that are able to move forward. It sees developers commit to being measured against what they've said they can deliver at application stage. We do recognise that design to completion is rarely a straightforward path, and so the process includes key touch points for check-in and review to make sure that we're all speaking the same language on each scheme. The majority of these criteria could be measured post-completion, but it also standardises the process for monitoring the medium and longer term objectives such as legacy jobs and lived-in carbon performance. And because all the information is standardised, and I'm sorry, I feel like I've said that word a million times now, but because we're collecting the same data in the same units for every scheme, it will provide us a really detailed image of how WMCA land and development investment is delivering that inclusive growth at a local and regional scale, and help us to identify grey areas where we might not be asking enough or where our requirements might be hindering development. So this slide breaks down the asks at each stage. We've identified these data collection stages in the process of a methodology for collection, validation and accountability, on the basis that these are the points at which we'd expect developers to have an idea and the point at which they'd impact what the funding ask is. Key to this is that the process is consistent across all schemes. It's sufficiently robust in its ask of developers to ensure we can collect the data that we need, but also that it's not so demanding that it becomes overly cumbersome. The initial inquiry isn't changing all that much. It's ultimately, where is it? Is it brownfield, and what is the actual project? But from that point onwards, we're asking for a bit more information at each stage, and almost seeing that as the way to access move to the next gateway in the single commissioning framework. We recognise that most of this information might not be certain at the early stages. It's more about considering it, and for the developer to put it at the front of the mind of the developer. So for that same reason, there's still flexibility to change the response up until the grant application. And at that point, we're asking the responses in the application to almost be a KPI measure for the developer. Oh, sorry, I've been a bit ill this week. We've got more scheduled in regular check-ins following practical completion to check in on performance in use and actually on the ground. And it's the discretion of the development managers and governance and assurance processes to established and in use by WMCA to ensure this process does not create barriers to getting funding out the door. So it's not a legal requirement here. It's really to help us get data sets together, but also hopefully to push performance forward. What it means in practice is that we're still considered by developers to be easy and fast to work with, and we don't want to lose that reputation. As a business-friendly and commercially minded organisation, we don't want this to turn into a heavy-handed and over-bureaucratic process, and we will continue to act in a reasonable and proportionate way based on good faith from applicants. So we're not going to start refusing applications on the basis that they've previously promised us 14 apprenticeships and delivered only 12. But for example, if an applicant committed to a fully zero carbon development and received a high level of grant on that basis, then we might look at how we worked with them in the future if that didn't come forward. But again, those decisions will be made with discretion, considering hiccups in the process, and follow all of our usual legal and governance procedures. And then I've just got slides which are a few examples of this information collected from schemes that we've got in the system already, where we've gone back, the kind of information that we're collecting, and that they're able to fill this in ultimately. So skills and employment, we're trying to break down what's legacy and what's just for the duration of the contract, and also the groups that they're targeted at, so the wider social value aspect. In terms of affordable housing, we're asking for a more detailed breakdown of the mix of affordable that's delivered, and that's flats and houses. I know we brought up previously at this meeting around what is the affordable component. Is it just a few one-bed flats in the edge? But also we're asking them to consider what the purchase and rental costs are and how this compares to our affordable definition earlier at the start, and what products are being delivered. Mobility and connectivity, we're asking for a slightly more detailed assessment of how people will get to the facilities that they need day by day. Again, this is generally done as part of a transport plan or a travel plan anyway with a development. It's not information that we've collected previously, but it's really helpful for understanding that our investment is actually connected to the transport network. And then another example, and I have blocked out the postcodes here just for commercial confidentiality reasons for the developer, but we are asking for spend with local suppliers. You'll see it will flag if it's in an area of deprivation, which also gives us a better idea of where our investment is really helping, and what the total spend in the WMCA is compared to the entire project. And I've just got some other very crude examples of what this looks like once we measure it, because it's based on just a few schemes, but we're able to look across our whole programme, or we will be able to look across our whole programme at what this means in terms of delivery. So if we're supporting a certain number of affordable products, or what the breakdown between the affordable typologies or all typologies is. We're continuing to flesh out this information for all the schemes through planning documents and conversations with developers. But ultimately, we've been pilot testing this on schemes at early phases for a few months now, and it seems to be working quite successfully. So we're hoping this data continues to become more robust. So that's the end of the presentation. Any questions?
You got your hand up?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Thanks, Rachel. Really, Mike, it's just to say for the board's benefit, all this is we currently operate a very similar approach to this with all our exemplary developers. So the ones you would expect provide all this information to us as read. We never have any issues, never any complaints. To be honest, they provide lots more information than what Rachel has just circulated. This is just about turning that best practice, Mike, into the norm across all the schemes that the SCF invests in, and for us to be able to clearly demonstrate that our funding is generating wider benefits beyond just housing numbers. So it's generating jobs and apprenticeships, the zero carbon point Councillor made earlier on, tackling deprivation, connection to transport. It's really about being able to say that we're receiving money from government and we are leveraging that money to drive wider placemaking and regeneration benefits. And it's enabling us to just capture and record that systematically. So when we come to the board, we can clearly demonstrate to you as a board that this funding is not just leading to housing outputs, it is generating a whole series of wider benefits and wider outcomes. As I said, this is exactly what our best developers, our best investors do. As read, we don't even have to ask. This is just about level playing field on everyone who gets SCF funding. And we have, as Rachel said, market tested this, both with officers in councils and with a wide range of developers and investors to make sure that what we're asking for is very, very easy for them to provide. Thanks, Mike.
Okay, Andy? On mute, Andy.
Yes, thank you. I'm just a bit, I think I support the sort of single framework and less process, more output. In our local plan, I put forward a local plan in Solihull that's very green, very aggressively green, and had some very simple things like orientate your housing so it gets maximum solar gain, put an EV charging point, be net zero by 2025. And during the examination, I never heard so many QCs being sent in to whinge about these little things. You know, eventually I think we'll win our way because the government will follow our lead on this. But I'm very keen that we have strategic, you know, in all our asks, we have a strategic framework that's non-negotiable in some ways, where we say, for instance, we will orientate your houses so they actually maximize solar gain. Because that should cost the developer nothing except the way it looks. You know, to put the house south facing to get maximum solar gain as opposed to north, 45 degrees or something. And certain requirements. But I also worry that the developers, when doing all this, will just say it's too expensive, too costly, and will shirk the responsibilities. Because I've come to the conclusion developers like to put their boxes the way they've always put their boxes. Because the way the development industry is structured is as soon as you put spade into ground, you've got 6 months to sell half your houses. And that's the way they're structured. If you don't sell half the houses, a guy gets sacked and another guy comes in. That's the way they work. It's a very much a culture in there where we need to sort of try and break that culture to be more long term in a building. But also on apprenticeships, we need to insulate our homes greatly, you know, in the West Midlands Authority, and we're struggling actually to find the tradesmen, the skilled people. So through this contract, we need to specifically say we want people who can insulate homes going forward, because we all know we have to insulate our homes over the next decade. But the rate determining step is actually we don't have enough people to do that work. So we ought to use this sort of framework to actually say create the jobs that we will need to drive the low zero carbon economy, whether it's heat pump engineers, whether it's that. And you've got to just give them the prod, because developers will want to do as little as possible because the way they're structured, the way the culture in their industry is: build, sell, 6 months, move on. And the other point on affordable housing, Council of Courts want to make this point, I know, is we need to make it on area rather than number of dwellings, because the danger is we'll have loads of 1-bedroom flats rather than 3-bedroom homes which are needed. And I think what we do need to do is to sort of try and make the affordable requirement based on area in that development as opposed to numbers, because they can fiddle the numbers by putting low 1-bedroom homes in, unless we specify a range of 4-bedroom, 3-bedroom, 1-bedroom homes in that affordable housing requirement we have. And I know the developers will whine about it, but you've got to be tough with them. Thank you, Mike.
Okay. I think we have to tread very warily that we don't put the prices up of properties purely and simply because we are forcing a mix of dwellings on any particular site. I think what I would like to see added into this, and I've had a conversation with Gareth about this, and that the help to own scheme, which of course is on the agenda in a minute, that this actually is highlighted as part of the SCF, that it does qualify into the SCF, because I've had people approach me and say, oh, does the help to own qualify in the single commissioning framework? And I had to check. I thought I was right, but I thought I'd check. And quite rightly, it does. Now, that's another thing that will spur on home ownership. And therefore, that's why I think we have to be careful that we don't force a mix of housing that can't be sold. But if we introduce developers to the help to own scheme and that we tell them that it does qualify through the SCF, I think we've got more chance of bringing more affordable homes through. Zahir.
All right, thank you, Chair. Just a couple of points. I think Andy has raised a couple of points which I was going to raise. One was like bringing in heat pumps and underfloor heatings and all those kind of things in this environment. And the biggest, I think, I always say to my officers that like, when we are building houses within our areas, which any area, I think we need to emphasize that employment, it should be locally, and the material should be locally. You should be looking for locally as well. That's the only way we're going to lift economically the people and the businesses in certain areas. Yes, certain areas you might not have the like building materials or the big companies supplying those kind of things, but the certain areas like in Sandwell, I think we need to lift people up and the community, and the only way we can do that is by apprenticeships, which Gareth mentioned, I think, and also by employment as well. So they got to put some sort of radius within certain radius. They have to employ certain people rather than doing like 30 miles, for example. If we start building within Sandwell, for example, if they put 20-30 miles, that's very, very, very far, right? So we need to put something mechanism in place that they need to start looking for employment locally, and that's the only way forward. And other thing is housing affordable. I was going to bring in the other next a couple of items, but affordable housing, I think, is a big issue. We need one thing we need is, I raised it last time as well. I think we need a definition of what is affordable housing. That's the first thing. Is it affordable to average person who's on basically basic income? That's the first thing, I think. And the second thing is, I think we need to start looking at any other options the builders they need to give us on a modular building. Basically, we need to compare ourselves with brick and mortar and modular buildings and new technologies. Andy mentioned as well. Is that something we can look can make affordable or not with those kind of new technologies or not? And I think that's something we need to bear in mind and we need to be focused on. Thank you.
Yeah, well, there is a definition of affordable which is accepted in the Combined Authority, because as you know, an affordable house in Sandwell is different to that in Walsall, different to that in Birmingham, different to that in Stratford-on-Avon. So we have got a standard definition which we roll out across all of it. We signed off that definition on affordable some time ago. Tracy?
Thank you. Just a couple of points, really, just to come back on that's been raised. So just first of all, just on the affordable housing issue that Andy raised, just to be clear, the local plan and all your sort of housing strategy team should have policies that are very clear about you don't have a housing development where the developer just builds 1-bedroom flats. your policies should be clear. All authorities have a clear indication of what the housing need is for that area. And if a developer comes forward with 1-bedroom flats where you need 3-bedroom homes, then you refuse the application. And, you know, it should be quite as simple as that. You know, obviously not an exact science, but it should be there or thereabouts through negotiation. But, you know, that shouldn't happen. So I think whilst the idea of having an area identified is an interesting one, I think there are things in place that make sure that your affordable housing should be delivered in the right way. Just the other point I wanted just about carbon zero and housing, the market forces. The market forces will impact on properties in terms of their saleability, and we're already seeing that. So, you know, the key things that homeowners are looking for now are, you know, reduced energy bills and full fibre to their homes. They are the key things. You know, we will work from home now, and that is something that trumps, you know, perhaps where the location they pick the house. They need full fibre and they need reduced heating costs. So I think the market will drive some of the behaviours around, you know, being you know, carbon zero, and you know, and I think we will find more fabric first homes rather than retrofit in the future, in my view. But, you know, obviously we shall see. Thank you, Councillor Bird.
Thank you. Obviously, some of the things that we impose upon developers can come back and bite us. I saw an article where, obviously, we all know that new homes are now being built with charging points for electric cars. But if you've got a row of terraced houses, it does cause difficulty to charge a car when, in actual fact, there is no drive. They end up on the pavement, and of course, pavement parking is now going to be outlawed. So I think we need to be conscious of that as well. Peter Buckley.
Thank you, Chair. I was just looking in the paper this morning. The government's gone bringing in new legislation for June, which basically kind of like build into our homes future-proofing against summers where temperatures are predicted to reach 40 degrees C, which is kind of alarming because the maximum we got to is about 32 in this country. So that's a big hike in temperatures. The second one is kind of design our houses so as we kind of unwanted solar gain, which is basically contrary to what Andy has just said about maximising solar gain, which in other fact is basically kind of almost goes to outlaw kind of bifold doors, ground to floor glass, and conservatories especially. So what is it to be? Is it to be kind of maximise solar gain or minimise solar gain? And also, if you read kind of about further on in the same damned article, this basically kind of, it's just that this is by one of the National Federation of House Builders is saying we can build heavily glazed buildings, but smaller companies who do not do a number of different housing types in one development may avoid it due to the potential cost of the dynamic thermal modelling on each home. In other words, that's those unintended consequences again, because you're imposing costs on the house builders which the small guys cannot do. I've kind of said this before and I'll say it again. Green and affordability is an oxymoron in the same sentence. You cannot do both. I'm in the affordability kind of game, and you know, and I want people to have affordable houses, and I'm with Tracy on her comments there. It's what's going to drive forward is now a house that's cheap to heat and affordable, and that's where I'm going, and I will stick that because that's what my voters want.
I wouldn't disagree with that, Peter. Andy, you want to come back?
Yes, I agree that we shouldn't impose too much, but when we negotiate with developers, we need to be firm. If it's grant money that we're giving to a developer, there ought to be conditions that we get what we want from them. In our local plan, yes, we've got 40% affordable housing, and we're going along basically following the custom and practice of units, much to our regret, but we can't go any other way. That's the way we have to do that. But if you're an authority, you can insist on what is required. Now, developers will build according to the plan, but if you're giving grant money to make land useful, then you do need to impose
today's your lucky day.
Things to them. I don't believe There is, I mean, okay, various parts of the boroughs have got, in the West Midlands, got different things. I know in Solihull, we can impose a lot of developers, but developers will want to build in Solihull, and we have to constrain their ambitions to build 5-bedroom mansions to actually deliver something what people want. Don't forget, 80% of our housing stock will still be pre 2020 in about 20 years' time. So we can't rebuild all our housing stock. We have to retrofit, and we'll have to do that. Now, I'm hoping that the market will say we'll have more insulation, etc., etc., etc. I'm not convinced the market is that agile, because when it comes to people buying houses, they'll buy the most expensive house they can afford, and they usually will worry about capital cost rather than revenue cost. And the only way you're going to get more insulation actually is through a financial instruments, i.e. the mortgages will take into account your lower house bills through insulation. But I don't think in the short term there is sufficient pressure to force the housing market to start building zero carbon homes. I don't think that's realistic unless you push them. And once you push developers in one direction, and I was told this at a party conference by developer, if we're pushed, we'll adapt. Unless we're pushed, we won't adapt. And suddenly all the extra costs of insulation, EV charging, etc., will come forward very easily if everyone has to do it, because they have to build houses and they'll adjust. I worked in industry. We had the Montreal Protocol. We were told, get rid of your CFCs from your refrigerators in 5 years. Great angst, great gnashing of teeth. When it was said that's the way it's going to be worldwide, we did it in 3 years. We just did it. And that's the way. And those businesses that couldn't afford it, well, actually, if they couldn't afford to change their refrigerant, well, maybe they should not be in business at all. And that's a tough approach, but that's the way it is. We've got to set the market conditions and let the market respond. If we go hodgepodge in the marketplace, the market gets confused. So we need very clear market direction.
I think what we need, as Gareth put it in the chat, we'll have an item on building net carbon zero at the next agenda, because somebody's got to pay for it, and that's the answer. And unfortunately, what I don't want to see is the ultimate consumer, because knowing developers as I do, their one eye is on building houses and the other one is their balance sheet. Gareth?
Yeah, just to say, Mike, and sort of bringing together some of the different points. One of the things the Combined Authority did under this board in 2018 was create a single commissioning framework, which sets out upfront very specific requirements that all developers must meet to specifically drive the market on quality, drive the market on design, drive the market on AMC, drive the market on energy performance, and to push brownfield first as well. And it's done that very successfully. And when we get to the private agenda item, the board will see the number of schemes that are coming through with high percentages of affordable housing, really high quality development. So we can definitely, through our grant frameworks, and we are doing, drive the market, and we can drive performance reporting. And we impose those through funding agreements. Councillor Bird, as you and others are aware, that's how we tie in that to the debate and discussion. But the Combined Authority does have to be a bit careful on this point. We are not the local planning authority negotiating Section 106 agreements. We are a funding body negotiating funding terms in order to access our funding, and we do that through the single commissioning framework. Actually, we're coming up this year to the relaunch of the guide for investors and developers, and we will definitely, coming back to the councillors' points, reassert the importance of zero carbon homes, energy efficiency, and the huge strides we've seen on AMC through the single commissioning framework. But we do have to use our expertise to try and find the right balance on every scheme between the different requirements. And that's really the skill, is to try and find that balance. But in answer to the councillor's question, we have to reject schemes that don't meet our requirements, and that is definitely driving the market, because people know in order to access CA funding, they have to step up on affordable housing, on design quality, on AMC and on zero carbon. So it is driving a differential because it's actually having a financial impact. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Okay. Well, I think we've covered. Oh, Shabrana, yes.
Thank you. So a couple of points. First of all, I just want to raise, I have very poor internet connection, so I seem to be dodging between my laptop and my phone, so I do apologise. Secondly, I just want to introduce myself. I don't think I've actually introduced myself since I've sort of been on this. I've replaced Councillor Thompson, so I'm Councillor Shabrana, who's the Cabinet Member for Homes, Neighbourhood, Birmingham. And there was just a couple of points that I wanted to touch upon. I know we've talked about affordable homes, but in basic terms, what is affordable homes? Can we actually afford it? I think I was talking to somebody a couple of days ago on this, is the legislation that we're using is like 20 years out of date. So in today's market, really, there is no such thing as a really affordable home. So something that we really need to sort of focus and look more into, what is exactly do we mean by the terms of affordable homes? And then the couple of points about module homes and retrofits. I think we're kind of, there is a need, but there isn't a need. We need to make more module homes. We need to make all our homes more retrofit. But then it always comes down to the cost impact. And then, can we really afford to do this? And then, is there a supply and demand? Because I think we do find that there isn't actually a demand, but there is a demand, but they're not actually would really want to do it because they know it's going to cost them twice as much as doing it. So therefore, we've got that little cloud hanging over us. And then the other point was, when we've got developers in Birmingham, we've got developers who actually not just do 1-bedroom flats, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 plus as well. So we always have that. So we've got the balance. And some about Councillor Bird, you mentioned about charging points. We're looking at charging point outs. I know we've got issues with parking. I think everybody has. Even on off streets and street columns, we're even thinking about having on the lighting columns, making them into a charging point. So therefore, we can encourage more people. Depending on where you actually do parking, yeah, at least that we're going to try and give the option that outside most of our lighting columns, there will be a charging point. So thank you. I think I've made enough notes.
Well, you know, like I said, everything we impose causes difficulty, even with charging points on lighting columns. If you've got terraced homes, believe me, in parts of Walsall, I'm sure in parts of Birmingham, there's a fight between neighbours to park outside their own house, which isn't their right. But in actual fact, you know, there is a great difficulty in some areas where people have got 2 cars and still live in a terraced property. So I think what we have to do is try and plan for that. I think one of the things I would say, Gareth, there seems to be some misunderstanding of what affordable means. We've got a definition that's been signed off by the Combined Authority. If you could circulate to all members that are on this call today, then we can see exactly what we believe to be affordable. As I said, affordable varies between different parts of the West Midlands. And help to own is something that I think, as I say, it's later on the agenda, and we'll get to it soon, is something that people have got to understand is targeted to those very people who are finding it difficult to get the mortgage that they need or the deposit they need to fund the mortgage, where in actual fact they can afford to pay rent. Now, Help to Own overcomes that problem, and obviously we'll go into that in a bit. So I think we've covered everything on that particular report, Rachel. So if you could circulate the definition of affordable that we understand, Gareth, then get somebody to do that, then we'll all be singing from the same hymn sheet again.
Mike, okay. I was just gonna offer Councillor Hussain, I'm really happy to have a virtual coffee, so to speak, just as a new board member, just to introduce you to the work of the board and what we've done and some of those different points that have been raised earlier. So if that'd be helpful, really happy to do that.
Thanks, Gareth. That's good. Okay. Moving on then to item 7, which is the Public Land Charter. Gurdip.
Thank you, Chair. So this item on the Public Land Charter, we have brought updates on the progression of a Public Land Charter to the board previously to report on how we have developed the contents of a Public Land Charter, and we've had excellent support from local authority officers through the Public Land Charter Working Group and industry experts on the Public Land Task Force in formulating the principles for the Charter. Today, we ask the board to consider and agree the Public Land Charter principles as set out in Appendix A of this paper. We ask for you to agree the proposals to formally launch the Public Land Charter early this year. Ask that a pilot project be considered that's identified through Delivery Steering Group to test how the principles in this paper that would inform included in the Charter could be applied in practice and showcase what can be delivered, and delegate to the Director of Housing and Regeneration in consultation with yourself, Chair, to agree the final version of a Charter. Subject to the approval of the principles by the board, the Charter in future will be made available for individual public sector organisations to take through their own governance processes. Also, subject to the approval, the CA, in collaboration with local authorities and the Public Land Task Force, will explore options for implementing the Charter, including the identification of a pilot project, as mentioned, to test how the principles can be applied in practice and really showcase what can be delivered. Options for potential projects will be considered by the Delivery Steering Group, which is the officer group to this board meeting, and we will report back at future meetings for your consideration. So the key thing today is to really consider the content of the Charter, which includes 5 themes with 2 principles under each theme, and I'll quickly just run through those. So theme 1 is on placemaking, and we have 2 principles: 1, to ensure we use public land as an enabler, and secondly, to ensure that we use public land to support our work on inclusive growth. We have a theme on partnership working, so ensuring public land is more than the sum of its parts, and we work efficiently and collaboratively together, and also to ensure that public land acts as an opportunity to develop some of these collaborative partnerships. We have a theme on redefining value. We're looking for a regional approach to best consideration and consistency on quantifying the outputs benefits that will be delivered. A theme on delivery and implementation, so ensuring that public land supports wider regional ambitions and that we have clear objectives, outcomes and timescales for delivery on public land. The final theme is on future readiness, to ensure that we have a long-term vision to grow public land value, and always to look at the sustainable options to deliver on this long-term view. And finally, to ensure that we take a holistic view of public land portfolios across the region. That was a quick run through, and I welcome any questions or comments today.
Okay, I have a hand up by Councillor Gakar.
Excuse me, thank you, Chair. Yeah, just a quick question. How will the combined authority reach out to these public companies who own land? How will the combined authority get these companies on board? Okay,
we have been engaging with our public sector partners across the region, so that includes all of the public sector organisations we've identified. There has been positive engagement. We've held workshops that have helped us to identify the key issues here, and collectively we've worked up these principles that we think will be able to be applied across the public sector.
Mike, could I just add to what Gerdip said on that point, and to complement what he said in answer to the councillor's question? Very simply, councillor, we have a public land task force of all the public land bodies and that's our mechanism that has been used to develop this charter, and that's our mechanism that will be used to make sure the combined authorities offer to all public sector landowners to help and support, whether it's funding or with advice to unlock public land, is taken forward. And that offer from my team has been made with your support, Councillor Bird, to all members of that public land task force. And if any member on this board has sites in their ownership that they'd like to talk to us about, please don't hesitate to contact myself or my team. We can bring funding through the single commissioning framework to support the unlocking of these sites. And actually, when I look at the pipeline, Councillor Bird, a lot of the sites we're looking for SCF investment in 2022 are in public ownership. So they are public land sites. So we do have a forum for the public land task force, but if anyone has any additional sites or just wants a further conversation on land in their council's ownership, I'm really happy and would really welcome that conversation. Thanks, Chair.
Have a hand up from Councillor David Welsh. David?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Sorry, the joys of working online and not having things in paper. I am flicking between the document and looking at all your beautiful faces. I just wanted to, well, a real general point to start off with. I support and understand the idea of joint working, not seeing things as individual. You know, the total sum is more than the individual parts, etc., etc. I get that. And I don't mind us having ambition with this, but I am very well aware of the challenges, and we all will in our own cities, around trying to bring partners together to have conversations about what might seem at times really, really simple things. And I'm thinking about all of the organisations that could be involved in this. So local authorities, NHS, the police, Severn Trent, etc., government departments. There are many, many, many public bodies that operate within our areas. How are we truly going to bring those together, and are we going to see true sign up by all organisations, or I suppose we just need a little bit of understanding about how far we've got with that through the board that you mentioned, and how far the reach is of that board. And then I just wanted to ask around Principle 7, public land supporting regional ambitions. What does that mean exactly? Because I suppose it's really a question, what is regional?
Yeah. Okay. Two questions. On the first question, we've got a lot of evidence, Councillor Walsh, of where the combined authority, often my team, has brokered between local council, Network Rail, and other partners to bring forward lots of the sites that are in the SCF in the next section that we're going to talk about in the private section. Those are sites where we've had to broker between different public landowners and different public bodies. And so I guess the proof is in the pudding, isn't it? Which is, are we able to bring forward sites, to broker sites together in a holistic way? I think having the Cabinet Office in that public land task force has been really valuable for us, having the head of property from the Cabinet Office, because that's given us a link into Whitehall and to each of the government departments. As many of you know, I used to work in Whitehall in different government departments, and I've found it really great having the Cabinet Office there, giving their sign up and their endorsement to the work we're doing on the public land charter. But my experience of the design charter, the AMC charter, the zero carbon homes charter, all the things we've done under this board, the proof is a bit in the pudding, Councillor Walsh. As you see schemes come forward that have been brokered and are applying the principles of the charter, and the combined authority is brokering those groups together, you tend to get more and more endorsement and more ownership as schemes go on. So thus far, everyone's been very positive on that public land task force. Everyone's been very supportive. Everyone's been looking at how they as organisations can endorse it. That's the point we've got to at this moment in time. The next month to 6 weeks are pretty critical, Councillor Walsh, to make sure that those organisations on that task force sign up to the principles of the charter. we have had to make clear two facets, which I know Councillor Bird, you were very keen on. So just to repeat for the board, one is this is not mandatory on anyone. We're not saying this is a mandatory. This is not a piece of planning legislation. This is a piece of guidance and advice that helps the combined authority support public authorities in unlocking land and sites and opportunities. And the second thing is this is all about impact. We want to see this make a difference and an impact on the ground that people can feel and touch. And it's not just a policy tool in that way. It's a tool that unblocks a conversation and starts to get support on the ground. And I think that's probably why, Chair and other councillors, why we've had quite a lot of endorsement is because people can see how this will generate a conversation which will help to unblock some really sticky sites. We were talking to one authority who's got a site in their ownership that's been stuck for 33 years. That we're hoping we can use this public land charter and the principles to help to unlock that site. Thanks, Chair.
Okay. Rightio, I think we've covered everybody now. Right, thank you for that, Gerdy. Then moving on to item 8, this is Affordable Housing Programme. Just an update from Rob.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just an update on some of the progress against the Affordable Housing Programme for this year. Just to also follow up on the conversation in the previous item, in terms of the affordable housing definition that was approved by this board in 2020. Just to confirm, I'll circulate those papers again, and also just to share that we're due to bring forward a kind of review of the evaluation of that definition. I think that's likely to be on the agenda for the next meeting of this board. So when I've got that confirmed, I will also confirm that with you, Chair, and we can have that further discussion at the next board if that's okay with yourselves. So in terms of this paper, this is an update on progress in a couple of areas, one of which is the joint venture proposal that we've been working on with some of the major registered providers in the region over the last couple of years. An update on the progress with that. So we are now in the stage of working through the full business case for bringing that back to this board in the spring, and also then hopefully further on to WMCA board for approval. We'll also be engaging with the Overview Scrutiny Committee in terms of that approach following their call-in of this subject late last year. Just to add on that we are working really closely with the registered providers on this programme. Unfortunately, Kevin Rogers from the partnership isn't able to join us today, but I did speak to him yesterday, and he wanted to just note his full support for the way things are moving forward, and his continued backing for all of the work that's being done by the CA and the partners to bring this proposal forward. And also the other section of the paper is just on a kind of wider partnership with all of the registered providers that are currently working in the region and are looking to work in the region. The proposal to set up a partnership board with the CA and the sector of registered providers to talk about and hopefully bring forward a lot of progress on some of the topics that have been discussed earlier today around how we work together to achieve net zero ambitions, how we work together to make sure affordability and net zero work hand in hand, how we work together on the skills agenda and RP investment into skills and employment in the region. And just to note that a lot of this follows on from really positive work with Homes England in recent past, and the fact that certainly some of the RPs that are currently working in the region have secured really significant funds through the Homes England Affordable Programme, over £1 billion of funding over the next 5 or so years. So how we work with those housing associations to spend that money in the region is really a key focus of that board and ongoing programmes of work with them. So that's the update paper in a nutshell, Chair, but very happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thanks, Rob. Any questions or comments, please? Ian Kettle?
Thank you, Mike. Good morning. Just a comment on the list you were talking about concerning regional suppliers, Rob. Is there any effort within that group of suppliers to keep things local for our local economy?
There is, yeah, absolutely, and we are very keen to make sure that continues to happen. So as has been mentioned in the previous items around the single commissioning framework and our criteria. There are criteria within that and things that Rachel will be helping us to monitor in terms of spend in the local economy and also investment in local skills and local supply chains. So that's part of our framework for all suppliers, but we'd also be, all developers, but we will also be working very closely with the RPs to see what we can do in partnership with them in terms of making sure that we can help to drive the local economy and to keep the spend local, keep the employment local as well, as much as possible. And that whole kind of multiplier effect of regional spend being deployed in the region and making sure that we can maximise that as much as possible. So that will certainly form part of those ongoing strategic discussions with the registered providers and part of our ongoing work with the single commissioning framework as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Gareth?
Yeah, Mike, just to say on the previous item, I know we touched on it in passing, but I just want to make sure everyone sort of has noted that we sought the board's approval today just for a delegated authority in the normal way for yourself, Mike, and me to agree the detailed design and contents of the charter, the principles of the charter set out in Annex A. I just want to make sure that people had noted that. And again, if anyone wants to be more closely involved in the charter, particularly that design phase, again, do contact Dermot or I would be really happy to have a conversation on it. But I just wanted to flag that, Mike, because I know on previous boards, people are quite keen to know where we've got a delegated authority for yourself and me to agree things in detail. So I hope everyone's okay with that delegated authority, but I just thought I'd flag that, Chair, if that's okay.
Yeah, it's fine. Okay. Okay, we're all comfortable with that then? Right, moving on then to Help to Own, which I've been championing, I hope, for the last couple of years. I think we've got, as far as I know, we've got Rob, Graham Russell and Sue Summers. See Sue. So I don't know who's going to address you. Taking off first, Gareth?
Yeah, so just to introduce the team, Chair, to the board. So Graham Russell is the Chief Executive of Amiens, and he's been working very closely with the Combined Authority and FDC on this proposal, Help to Own, as it went to the Combined Authority Board and Investment Board and was signed off by this board as well. Sue Summers, who I think many of you know, runs FDC, which are the key leading authority behind Help to Own, and Rob Lamond, who I know many of you know, is the lead for affordable housing policy within the Combined Authority. So Chair, if it's okay, I've asked Graham to just hopefully the board's all seen the paper, but Graham's got a few slides that he's put together on the back of the review that's been undertaken on Help to Own. Obviously, Help to Own still in relatively early stages on the demonstrator site, but some really positive signs emerging, as you say, Chair, about the impact this could have and the positive direction of travel. So I'm handing over to Graham now to present, and we'll leave Sue, Rob and Graham to take it from here.
Thank you, Gareth. Thank you, Chair. Okay, can everybody see that? Is that?
Yep.
Great. Okay, I suppose just by way of background, before we go into the work that we've done, we've been evaluating projects now for over 20 years, and I think, as you'll see as we go through this, we believe that certainly in this initial stage, Help to Own has performed well, and therefore is a really positive example of where public investment has gone into an exceptional proof of concept scheme and seems to be delivering really positive results at this point. So by way of background, Help to Own is a new affordable housing product, and that's based on that broader definition of affordable housing that the CA has that we've been discussing in earlier parts of the board meeting. It provides a rental solution to local residents that gives long-term tenure security, the benefits of home ownership without many of the risks, and complete flexibility to leave whenever the tenant wishes. Residents can rent their property for 25 years at the market rate, with the option to acquire for £1 at the end of the lease. And what Help to Own does and has been developed to do is to address the substantial issues that many potential buyers who are in work face in raising the deposit to secure a mortgage. In January 2020, the CA board approved investment of up to 4.8 million from the CA's devolved housing and land funds to be invested alongside the City of Wolverhampton's investment as equity to deliver a 100-unit Help to Own scheme at the Marches site in Wensfield, Wolverhampton. The Marches Help to Own purchased the 100 units on the Marches development in April 21, and these are now being received in tranches as they're completed, and that process will continue through to the spring of next year. As Gareth outlined, Hamion Consulting has undertaken an initial high-level review of the Help to Own pilot project. And in terms of the review findings, the results of the initial stage are really positive, and they indicate that the pilot has demonstrated that there is demand for the Help to Own product. So there has been very substantial interest registered in the Marches Help to Own, and all 100 units have been allocated to prospective tenants. It does provide a new route for households to get onto the housing ladder, and it complements rather than duplicates other schemes. And again, I think that's really important in a project where we're looking at issues like additionality. It has established governance structures and documentation that can now be replicated, and therefore it offers economies if more schemes are brought forward. It really has successfully passed the first risk hurdles that were identified, and many of those were flagged in the previous board papers. Although, as you'd expect at this stage, there are various potential risks that remain in terms of longer term void levels, the attractiveness of the properties over time, and the impact of economic downturn, unemployment and higher interest rates, which are factors which affect the housing market more generally. It has managed to, alongside that equity investment that's gone in, secure debt on appropriate terms to deliver the scheme. It's achieved the target rental levels that were set out in the financial modelling, and the expenditure has been in line with expectations. I think as we move forward, the key issue, or one of the key issues, will be to need to show whether the concept can be delivered without that grant funding or that support that is not necessarily in a form that is returnable. And finally, it has indicated that the approach is potentially scalable. Finding appropriate sites is going to be key, and they need to make that balance between something which is affordable to those who don't have sufficient funds for a deposit, but actually of a high enough quality and attractive enough that people want to live in them for the long term. Interestingly, what we have noted through the consultations that we've undertaken is that several local authorities in other parts of the country have already expressed an interest in Help to Own. So as a product and approach, it is certainly generating that broader interest. So overall, the pilot has suggested that the concept is successfully proved at this stage. There is a strong evidence base to suggest that the approach should be endorsed for a wider rollout on policy grounds, although each future investment would need to be fully assessed on its own merits. And then finally, in terms of the recommendations to the Housing and Land Board, it's recommended that the positive findings of the review are welcome and endorsed, and that provides a strong evidence base to support the wider rollout beyond the pilot project. Secondly, that there are that the board notes the initial findings of the review of Help to Own, and also that there will be a more detailed report produced in February, and recognises and notes the importance of understanding the progress of Help to Own as an important part of the board's remit in relation to affordable housing and regeneration deliverables. That's all I was going to present at this stage, Chair.
Okay, well, I hope this gives an understanding to some of the people of what Help to Own is about. Bhupinder?
Thanks, Chair. Listen, I just very quick want to say, Graham, this is a fantastic scheme. I must declare an interest in this because we talked about Wensfield. It's the first site I represent Wensfield. These have literally flown off the shelf. I mean, there's not one bit of negative news I can give you. It has been positive, absolutely positive. Yes, there's a criteria. You know, the criteria we set, you must be local, key workers, there's other implications. But I tell you what, it's been absolutely fantastic. The response, I mean, for me, it's credit where it's due. And I just want to say, Chair, I want to thank you as well, because I know you said some really good positive comments about the Help to All scheme. I think it was a previous meeting where you said that this is a groundbreaking scheme, and we should be shouting from the rooftops. I totally agree with you. We may not agree on everything, but I tell you what, I agree with you on this one. So thank you for this. It's an excellent report, fully endorsed. Long may it continue. Thank you.
Thanks, Bhupinder. I do have some pearls of wisdom at times, but I'll call Andy and then Sue. I'd like to comment, please. Andy?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I think I first of all, I commend you for your perseverance in pushing this forward. It's a great scheme, and it's another club in our, in our bag or in our armory. What I'm interested in, maybe not for now, maybe for February, is the sweet spot. Because, we've got to look at, what interest rate effectively is in this scheme, and how does that compare to a 100% mortgage? Because now mortgages are coming back. So, what is better? What's the better option for the person? Is it to buy the house on 100% mortgage, or is it to go into this? There is a potential recycling money in this scheme if we get this right. In terms of we can keep this could be self-funded rather than relying on grant funding. What is that point? And who's going to benefit from this the most? When you look at these schemes, there's going to be a certain demographic that will benefit from this. Usually I would say, nurses who start a low salary as they progress through their things, they'll earn more money, and therefore they could at some point benefit by their own house. Can they actually buy early? And the other thing I like explored, and maybe this is more shared ownership, but maybe this could be linked to this scheme, is the use of the HRA accounts to fund this. But this is affordable housing, so it's appropriate HRA use, housing revenue account use. And if the housing revenue account gets a payback on it, then it's a very positive use of the housing revenue account. And I won't go into bore people with the housing revenue account in detail, but if you put money into a shared ownership on housing revenue account, it benefits the housing revenue account because your housing stock is not depreciating. It's a non-depreciating asset. And also, the final question I'd like to, maybe looked into is what happens to the capital value? Is there anything we can do to harness the capital gain in this scheme to make sure we can keep rolling it out? But I think it's a great scheme, and I think there's a lot of exploration to be done, because I think this scheme will have to be flexible and react and basically try to get the people who are not being served by the mortgage companies. And we do need to work with the mortgage companies on this as well.
Okay, before I call Sue and Sam, who have been the architect of this, I've got 2 or 3 hands up. I've got Peter Butlin, Peter, and then I've got Ian Kettle.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm full of praise for this scheme. It's a wonderful scheme. We've had to, I'll give you kind of a few statistics. I love my numbers. The average house price in the country now is somewhere in the region of about £270 a house. And that includes London prices in the average out. We've got a hotspot in Warwickshire where basically the average house price in Warwickshire is over 325,000 a house. So that's why we've kind of put in place what we call a key worker scheme. And I'll give you the real hotspot in Warwickshire, which is Warwick and Kenilworth, where the average house price is £410,000 per unit. And that you get to the point now where you've got people who actually kind of need to, key workers, low wage workers who can't afford to live where they need to be providing the services. So what ends up, they basically kind of have to commute large distances because they can't afford to live locally. And that's one of the reasons why we put in a key workers scheme to make it more affordable to basically people to live closer to where they work. I'm full of praise of this one. I think it's a brilliant idea. And we've got our own problems in Warwickshire in terms of house prices and the heating of the market. Anything that makes so that those that are less well off in our communities get a chance and a leg up to get onto that housing ladder, I'm all for it. So I'm full of praise for this, and big thumbs up from me. Thank you.
Well done, Peter. Ian?
Very interested, Mike, to hear what Andy's got to say concerning the funding. Just making the comment of it, has any work been done on the geographical take-up within the scheme? It's obviously been a very good success for the CA, but do we have any work done on the geographical take-up?
Well, I'm sure that can be answered by either Sam or Sue. Sue?
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. Thank you for inviting us here today. As you say, I'm joined by Sam Miller, my colleague and architect of the scheme. A lot of questions there to unpick, but just an overriding statement, I think, listening to the members of the board today, is one of the key objectives is to engage with the developer early, is to buy off plan and hopefully have a level of influence on what the quality and criteria of those properties might be. The developer's getting certainty, in that scenario, the pilot 100 units and forward funding, and in return there's a possibility of having influence over the quality of those houses. A lot of questions raised in terms of HRA account. I don't know, Sam, you might want to comment on this, but we are talking to local authority at the moment on the very subject and trying to work through that. In terms of who is eligible, Wolverhampton set the scope for the pilot in Wensfield because it was predominantly their scheme, and the criteria we would see would evolve dependent on the geography. And just on that point of geography, we do have some stats on where the inquiries were from. We were overwhelmed with just under 4,000 unique interests in the scheme for 100 tenancies. So as you might expect, the geography was quite broad over the West Midlands footprint, and we'd be delighted to share some of that feedback. In terms of mortgage, I think the one thing I would say, but I'm sure I'm going to pass over to my colleague to add to these comments, is Help to Own is giving the security to the tenant of long-term rental. It's their home, they can decorate it, they create a community, but it is not binding. They can leave that scheme with 3 months' notice. I'm sure, Sam, you might want to add on comments on the 100% mortgage. And in terms of capital value, obviously the goal of Help to Own is to create scale and as many sites as we can, so that if someone's life circumstances change, they could potentially move to another Help to Own scheme, which we would call portability of that scheme. That's really all the comments I wanted to make. Sam, would you like to come in?
Yeah, jump in, Sam.
Thanks very much, Councillor Bird. So I think, I mean, there's a lot of questions there, and they're actually quite detailed questions that I don't think it's that easy to answer here, and I think people would lose the will quite quickly. So if it's okay, I'll just do a kind of high level, what are the really key features of Help to Own in terms of its scaling? So right from the outset, one of our biggest objectives was that we wanted to demonstrate that this could be done on a commercial basis, and we worked really, really hard to try and demonstrate that. Now, I know Gareth and Graham worked incredibly hard on the other side making this fit from whether it is equity or whether it was a subsidy in one way or the other. But overall, I think it's fair to say currently we are demonstrating that there is a return on capital and a return. But why is that important? That's important because of the whole recycling of funds, but also the largest premise of this is the public sector standing up for its regions individually as local authorities, but also as the combined authority area, and saying, actually, there are people that are hardworking, key workers, going about their lives with families, wanting to live where they want to live, and actually not being able to have what I think, or we think, is a fundamental, which is tenure security, which is, I'm going to live here for the next 15, 10 years or whatever. And what we believe is very important here is demonstrating that on a commercial basis, we can stick up for our local residents, have that whole regeneration concept, but also that we can be professional landlords as a public sector looking out for the region. And so what we've demonstrated, apologies, one of the councillors made the point, there's been no real complaints that haven't been dealt with very, very quickly, is because we set this up with the tenants in mind. It's all about, scale. Scale means that we have influence with developers, and it goes back to all of the conversations that have been had on this session, is where you can influence very early on with the developers. They know where their profit margins need to be. They know what's important to the West Midlands Combined Authority and the local areas. And because you have scale, you can go in and buy and give them certainty. You can really influence that agenda. And where you're saying about influencing developers and them not being able to afford it or not being happy and all these different things, it's all done up front. It's all part of an iterative process. So just finally, I just wanted to bring a point out, because there was a lot of discussion on affordable, and I am by no means an expert, but just in my very simple head, I see the market as being social housing, which is either owned by local authorities or RPs, housing associations. And broadly speaking, that has a definition, a rental policy, that it's effectively 50 to 60% of market value for rent. This is roughly speaking, they're very complex formulas. In terms of affordable from the West Midlands Combined Authority area, again, Gareth and Councillor Mike Bird and Rob Lamont did a great job of including help to own within that definition for the purposes of accessing grants in the single commissioning framework, is my understanding. And then what you have is the affordable definition that each local authority adopt, and that typically is adopted via the NPPF definition, or the National Planning Policy Framework definition, which typically is 20% below market value. So where the real power of this and why the stage today is so helpful is the combined authority have been, put their foot forward in saying, yes, we include help to own. But if each one of the individual local authorities include help to own in their affordable definition, then we can have conversations with every single developer in terms of sourcing and getting that scale and saying to them at the planning stages, we can take X% of your units off you for the purposes of help to own. And again, the whole point of help to own is to demonstrate its commerciality, to recycle funds and have that influence on each one of the local areas. So I'll finish there.
Well, I think the comments have said it all. I mean, I've been battling with this, as you know, for the last 3-4 years since Sue first showed me this. And I'm grateful to say it's come to fruition, and I hope we'll go from strength to strength. David Welsh, I see your hands up.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Chair. Wanted to ask I don't want to detract from the success of this, because I think it is really, really good. It's providing a form of affordable housing, so it's well done for that. I suppose the question really is for me: how do we balance this with providing other forms of affordable? And I for Coventry, and I would say across the region, provision of, so I can't get my words out today. Provision of social rented properties is a key priority for us, but it is more expensive. So how do we balance and how do we work out our investments and where to put it? Because clearly you could you could do this, and you provide an affordable form of housing, but it isn't necessarily where the real pressure is within certain parts of the region. I'm also very aware that government's moves towards affordable, they're making more money available for different schemes that so options for first-time buyers and things like that. So in terms of this investment, how do we reconcile that, and how do we work out how's best to where to put our investments, I guess, is the best way to put it. Sorry, a bit drawn out, but that's my question.
Gareth, you want to?
Yeah, I think that's a tremendous point, actually. And I was going to say it if Councillor Welsh hadn't said it. What we need in the region, and it's flagged in Rob Lamont's paper, is we need a real mix of affordable housing product that meets local housing need. And that's why we are working so closely with each local planning authority on every single scheme coming through the SCF to make sure the mix of affordable housing meets local planning policy requirements, first and foremost. And secondly, the other bit of Rob's paper, Councillor Welsh, that you're sort of referring to is the point around the work we are now doing at scale with Homes England and the strategic partnerships that Homes England have with the housing associations in the region. Those housing associations have secured significant funding, as Rob's paper says, from Homes England. And being frank, it's our job to work in partnership with Homes England to ensure that money goes on the right type of affordable housing product. The point you're raising, Councillor Welsh, the combined authority's view on help to own, and there are other similar affordable housing products, was always that we needed to make this a non-grant subsidy based product. That was always our view. The products that you're referring to, Councillor Welsh, will always be grant subsidy. They will always require, for example, social housing units, housing for social rent will always need grant subsidy. And the paper that Rob referred to, the Affordable Housing Update, puts front and centre our work this year with Homes England and with those housing associations to secure the funding to deliver those houses that residents need, and working with you and your team, Councillor Welsh, to make sure the affordable housing in Coventry, for example, really meets local need. So for me, when I look at it at a helicopter level, it's that mix of affordable housing product across the region to meet local needs, working with local planning authorities, that is the real thing we need to drive forward on this year, and particularly getting that Homes England funding to those RPs deployed in the region at scale. That's a big challenge for this year, and really important if we're going to deliver the levels of affordable housing we want to deliver and we know need to be delivered in this region.
Okay. I've got Andy, and then much as it's interesting, we'll have to move on. Andy?
Can I come back? I wanted to, I'll just come back again. I don't do it very often, but I just wanted to just further that, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll be as quick as I can. So I do take the point you make about grant funding and social rent requiring grant funding, whereas this still required an investment to get it off the ground, didn't it? And nod your head.
Yeah, but it required an equity investment, not a grant investment. Yeah.
Right. So it's not the same pot of money that we're talking about then.
No, it required an equity
so that's my
investment.
level of knowledge that has, because my question was going to be, if you've got a choice of providing 200 of this kind of accommodation as opposed to 70 or 100 affordable, social rented housing, with the way we work with numbers, I would be concerned about how that went. But if you're telling me this is not in conflict with the drive to provide social rented property, I am fine with that. And thank you for your time, Chair. Let me.
No problem. No problem. Andy?
Yeah, I was just going to come back. It's not about this versus that. It's another part of the spectrum of offers, and I think equity-based investment is the way to go forward in this, as opposed to revenue-based investment, which social rent inevitably is. But we also be very clear that this is not for everyone, nor is anything for everyone. There's a narrow demographic that will do this, and the point I was trying to make earlier is we just need to find out where the demographic is, and how do we expand that to go to other demographics. That's all. but it's a great scheme, and I think it doesn't conflict at all.
Gareth, you can have the final say.
Yeah, just to conclude that point, the key here is each local authority does an assessment of housing need, what need is needed in their local authority area. Our role here as a combined is to help as much as we can provide the housing product within that region to meet that need, within that local area to meet that need. And as Councillor Bird said at the start, that will be different in each local authority area. And actually even that the values that were referred to in the chat, I can tell you from my experience, those values are incredibly different across this region. Both on land, on house prices, on affordable housing, that are incredibly different. And the point of the regional affordable housing definition is to give us some clarity around that through the single commissioning framework. But your point is absolutely right, Councillor. The number one thing for me is that we provide housing product across the whole spectrum for all needs and for all users. That's what we've got to try and do. And this is another major part of that. But you're absolutely right, and Councillor Welsh is absolutely right. It's not the only part of that product system that we need to change.
Two things that we need to do, Gareth. We need to make sure that we, the combined authority, write to all of the local authorities in the West Midlands and tell them that help to own qualifies from our point of view as affordable, so they can then consider every planning application that they have to determine that this help to own, if it's in the mix, should be accepted as the benchmark for affordable. And therefore planning applications, I think, will be smoothly acceptable on this particular scheme. And the second point is, I think somebody mentioned about 100% mortgage, I think it was Andy. As far as I'm concerned, what this has is no fear of negative equity, in as much that if the housing market were to crash, you haven't got that fear of having a mortgage around your neck at 100%, when in actual fact, the value of your property has gone down probably by 30%. There is a walk away with a 3 months notice. And I think that is the benefit, one of the benefits of this scheme. So well done, Sue, well done, Sam. And hopefully we'll see a scheme in Warsaw, being as I've been championing this for so long, you know.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay.
Thank you.
Righty-ho. Moving on then to, I've got to be another meeting at 12, so we've got half an hour. West Midlands Investment Prospectus. I've got Colin and Graham addressing this.
If you're okay, Councillor Bird, I've got another presentation. Is that a...
Graham, just to flag, is your presentation in the private section of the meeting or the public section of the meeting? Because there's two agenda items. There's two agenda items.
It should be in the private section. We've got. Yeah. Okay. That being the case, then I'll move the resolution that we go into private and stop the stream. And tell me when that's been done, please.
Oh, it's, yeah.